Grace Wirzba. I'm a local artist from Lethbridge, Alberta, and today I'm a guest on this month's ARTLab, and we're going to be making hand-quilted 8-point stars. So come along with me. So what we need today to make our star quilt block is you're going to need some fabric, any fabric. This is all from the thrift store, so you can get solid colors, patterns, anything you would like. This one is even an old pillowcase. You can use anything. You can play around with textures and stuff if you want as well, because we're hand sewing. The fiber content of the fabric is like whatever you want it to be. All right, then we've got thread. Our tape measure is useful. We've got our pin cushion with some pins in it. Needles like this, which you can get at the dollar store, at Michael's, or anything like that. I've got my fabric scissors here, but you can also use any scissors you have as long as they're sharp enough to get through the fabric. Okay, so for our actual block, I'm going to get myself four squares that are 3.5 inches square. So I'm going to take 4 of those, and then of the same color, I'm going to cut 2 5-inch squares. And I have them cut in half here because that's what we'll be doing. So everything in this block is either a square or a half square triangle. So I'm going to cut them in half on the diagonal, and then we'll have 4 triangles and 4 squares, and those will be our background colors. So yeah, so the pattern will make the most sense if these are all a cohesive color or fabric. Our next step is to cut one larger square that is 6 inches square. And everything I've cut here, I've cut with my fabric scissors. If you have access to it, you can use a rotary cutter and mat, but I like to use a scissor for everything. It makes it super easy and with stuff that I have on hand. And finally, we are going to cut 4 more 3.5-inch squares. And these can be any color or pattern. Here I actually have 2 that are different. So, but it makes it easier if you just got squares and then you just cut them in half again like we did with our bigger ones. And then you have your triangles ready for the points of the star. But yeah, for these you can use 8 random fabrics or 4 of the same fabrics or anything like that. So there you go. Okay, so for our first step, I've threaded my quilting needle. There are lots of different sizes of quilting needles too, and I would just say use the one that you feel most comfortable with. Sometimes if they're too big, it's like kind of tough to pull it through the fabric, so like kind of like a little medium-sized one is good. So I've threaded my needle, and I've just tied a basic knot a couple times in the thread, nothing fancy at all. The important thing to remember with quilting is that you always want your right sides together. So as you can see here, one of my sides is darker than the other, so this is the right side. So I want to put my right side to the right side so that when I open it up, the vibrant colors are then on the outside. So for this, I'm taking one of my 3.5-inch triangles and one of my 5-inch triangles, and I'm taking this and I'm lining up the sides, the shorter sides, and I'm going to just hand stitch these together. And usually you want something called a seam allowance, which is this part here between the stitches and the edge of the fabric. So you don't have to be measured about it. I would say just leave almost like not even a pencil width in between, because you don't want it to be too close to the edge that it pulls out, and you don't want it to be too far that you're like wasting a bunch of fabric. So usually I just stitch the super basic in and out stitch. You can either use double thickness of thread, like you can double it up, or you can just use the single. I'm just using single here. And so all I do is I take it in and up and in and up, and then do it a couple times and then you pull it through. And sometimes to secure it, I just throw in a back stitch or something like that. And I can show you that. Okay, so here we have a relatively straight line, and if I'm going like this, I can go back kind of one stitch and then start going forward again, and that just kind of makes the seam a little bit stronger. I would say try and make your stitches as small as you can. I'm not even doing them that small here, but like pretty close together. The closer your stitches together, the more solid your seam will be. Here is the finished seam for one point of our star. As you can see, I have it sewn right here like this, and then when you open it up, then it looks like this. So that's one corner of our star, which will be like this, and the square will be here. So that's that part. So then you want to take your next triangle. It could be any fabric, and you can, instead of lining it up right along the edge, I would overlap it a little bit here with your other point, and that'll make your star come together nice and neatly in the end. So now I'm just going to sew a seam along this side, and then I will show you the next part. Okay, now that I've sewed on this second piece, when we open it up, it makes a perfect little triangle. This will make one of our 4 sides to make our star. This is my finished one here. To move a little bit quicker, I have some other finished ones here. So this is what it'll look like. You'll have 4 of these little guys ready to go with your centerpiece. Move it over. Okay, so before we sew them to my center square like that, I'm going to sew on to 2 of the sides. I'm going to go like that, and I'm going to sew my 2 corner squares onto each of these. So I'll put one here, 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 and here, and they will just get sewed on right sides together like that again. And we'll do our seam right here. Okay, so now that we have our little squares, our 3.5-inch squares, sewed onto the end of each of these, now I'm going to go ahead and take my center square and sew on each of these right sides together to my big square in the center. So we're going to stitch along here, and then we'll put it all together. Okay, so we have our 3 pieces now that we are going to sew together into our star block. So again, once you have more seams, it's a bit trickier because you want to try and match up your little seams here as best as possible. And so this is also a good time to use pins, which will help hold everything in place while you're sewing it. So if you're lucky, which sometimes I am and sometimes I'm not, then it'll line up perfectly when you open it up so that it looks like that. All right, so we'll do that and the same thing to this side, and then we'll come back. Here we have our finished 8-point star quilt block. For our next step, we're going to be getting it ready for hand quilting. Okay, so often when I'm quilting a small piece like this, sometimes I make them into pot holders or just tiny wall hangings. So we're going to finish off this whole thing, so it's a finished little piece in itself. Often I will put a piece of flannel or flannelette. So this is a work in progress with our quilting here, and you can see that this piece in between is like a little bit fuzzy, so you can do that. Or you can just use any piece of fabric. So what I've got here is just our fabric that's actually the same as our corner color. And I'm going to cut that and use that as kind of a quote-unquote batting. And so we're going to do that. And then I'm going to use this color as my backing piece. So I'll have this on the inside, and then I'll take this and I'll sandwich my little mint color here in between the turquoise and the block, and I will leave some extra of the turquoise around the edges, and I'll show you what that looks like. Alright, so here we've got our little sandwich. We've got our mint in between, and we've got our turquoise here. This is another good time before we start quilting to pop a couple pins in to keep it in place. So I usually like to do one in each corner and sometimes one in the middle to keep us where we want to be. Okay, again, I'm just going to take my white thread, knot it at the end with my little needle. Again, some people use even smaller needles for quilting. You can use whatever size you like best, whatever size they have at the dollar store, whatever you want. You can also find these definitely at the thrift store. Okay, so usually you want to quilt from in to out. Maybe I'll come back and put a little X or something across here, but I'm just going to start, and how I like to quilt is just around the edges. So I'm going to start from the back side, going to push it up. So I've got it coming up in one corner here, and again, just the exact same stitch. You can do it, now this will be seen, right? So you can do it however you want. You can do designs, you can do, I like to keep it pretty simple, because I like that kind of a more traditional look with my funky colors, but it's hard to see on the yellow here, but I'm just going to go all the way around my square to start, and this keeps everything in place. This is the exact same technique as hand quilting on a large piece for like a bed-size quilt and stuff, but this is perfect. If you were using this as a pot holder or something, I would definitely recommend having a thicker batting. And our batting, remember, is our middle of our sandwich there, our lettuce and our meat. And I would definitely recommend having, if you're using it for something really hot, you can get batting specifically for that, or an old piece of wool, old piece of felt, something like that. We keep it really nice and thick. So I'm just gonna sew all around here, and I'll show you when we're done. Okay, a couple of things I wanted to say while I'm hand quilting here is that I am not a very tidy artist or quilter in any way, shape, or form. And so I find that quilting is like a really good time to to tidy up some stuff that maybe looks a little bit bad. Because I think if we're not here to be forgiving about our quilting, then what's the point? And so here, some of our seams are just like stick up a little bit, or they, like here, this is a good example. So here it's like a little bit billowy, probably because my line wasn't super straight, and I just don't have the time to worry about that. So I like to come in afterwards and just like quilt that stuff right down into place. And the wonky look is how I like it, honestly. That's why I use a scissor instead of a rotary cutter. So you can make it however you want. And I like that it looks handmade. I think that's the fun part. Otherwise, we could just buy a quilt. So yeah, it's a great time to clean up some stuff. It's a great time to have some fun. I have done quilts before where I've done like a little circle or something, or you could do other shapes quilted right in to your fabric here. So yeah, it's a great time to fix up little silly stuff and also to have some fun. Okay, so here is our finished quilted square. You can see the quilting on the back. and on the front. And now I'm going to show you how to do a simple binding. So I've done it already here, just to close up. So the easiest way to do it is to use your backing. So that's why I made my backing a little bit bigger, with about like an inch extra around the edges. And the easiest way to do it, you can iron it if you are so inclined. And so I'm going to just fold it over like this, and then again, and then I'm going to stitch it all along here, just with a simple stitch. You can see that mine is kind of visible. You can kind of make it, you can try and make it a little bit hidden by tucking the stitches inside, but it's also fine if you can see them as well. So I'll do that, and then I'll show you. Okay, so here is our finished little mini quilt. There you go. You can add as much quilting as you want. You can quilt in here if you want. And here is a different pattern in progress with our quilting. And there you go. Have fun. Thank you for joining us for this month's Art Lab on quilting. Make sure to follow the gallery on Instagram and come check out the gallery when it's open again. And yeah, thanks for joining us. Bye.